Hello, my name is Daniel Greenberg. I'm the CEO of Earth Deeds, also a longtime supporter of AASHE, and I'm excited to present this proposal around onsetting the AASHE 2015 conference in Minneapolis. And I had the opportunity to speak a little bit with Skylar and Andrea at the recent conference and wanted to follow up with this deeper proposal. And onsetting, I realize, is a new term for us, and so I want to spend a little bit of time backing up and talking about offsetting and how onsetting compares to that, and sort of how I was led to even think about all this, to give you a bit of background. And I'm also assuming that we're all on the same page when I say that we're in a unique moment, not just in human history, but really in planetary history, and that the window for us to respond to global warming is narrowing, and we really need to act now. So, I had the privilege of starting an organization called Living Roots in '99, which partnered with UMass Amherst, and it ran study abroad programs in what are called eco-villages around the world. And it was great work. In the end, over 1,500 students really woke up to new possibilities in their own lives, in the world, and there was a problem, because here we were, an organization all about sustainability, and yet what were we doing? We were also flying students all over the world, which was emitting megatons of carbon dioxide and contributing to global warming. So I never felt good about this, and from the beginning what I did was I set up a system where the students measured their carbon footprints and reduced those footprints wherever they could. And then we priced that carbon, and I'll speak a little bit more about carbon in a few minutes. At that time, there was no real good guidance around pricing carbon, so we used the average in the voluntary carbon market, which at that time was around $15 a metric ton. We just pulled it out of tuition, and so each program had a fund to acknowledge and account for the emissions of that program. Then the question comes, well, what do you do with that money? Now, we could have easily given it to any one of 100 of these carbon offsetters around the world, and I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of them. And I also recognize that many of us, even in the environmental world, are only loosely familiar with offsetting. So let me just share quickly the basic idea and then how onsetting is different. So offsetting is basically saying we do a lot of things that emit carbon pollution, whether it's driving a car, flying a plane, using electricity, etc. You can pay a certain amount to one of these offsetters, and they will then reinvest that money into a project, efficiency, renewable energy, reforestation, etc. And the claim is that through your money, they are then able to reduce a certain amount of carbon emissions from entering the atmosphere. And then they give you a nice certificate and say you are now carbon neutral. You have mitigated, you've neutralized your emissions. And to their credit, they have helped a lot of people better understand their emissions, and they've supported a lot of good projects around the world. And there's a bunch of challenges. So let me go through a couple of them. A big one is that because to be able to sell these credits on the voluntary carbon market, they have to be verified by third-party verifiers, and there's also all these other middlemen. It's often as little as 30 cents on a dollar that actually makes it to the project. They've often been compared to 16th century indulgences where parishioners could pay the church to absolve them of their sins. And so many people say offsetting is similar and is just allowing people to buy a clean conscience while delaying meaningful action. And then pricing carbon on the market or by market forces have a number of challenges. One, the market is volatile, the price goes up and down. For example, it plummeted a couple of years ago when there was an oversupply in the European market. But really, what relation does that have to the real impacts of these emissions? There's also perverse incentives. So imagine I am an offsetting company, and you are a project holder. Let's say you are planting trees. Well, it's to my interest to pay you as little as possible to buy the right to claim that environmental benefit of the offset of the mitigation value of your project. Well, really, we should incentivize the system so that you get as much money as possible, right? And pricing based on market forces limits both how we think about and respond to climate change. So, for example, it leads us to think that the problem is carbon pollution, and the solution is reducing those pollution, that carbon pollution, which of course, yes. But if you step back, we realize that both the problems and the solutions are much more systemic. So, and they're limited in many ways. So if by some miracle we all decided to offset all of our emissions, we would quickly run out of projects to support because we are not neutral as a species. And if by some larger miracle we were able to neutralize all of our emissions, if we don't change our political and economic systems, we're just going to end up back in the same place. And really, I mean, is it enough for one school to be carbon neutral when the world really isn't? I mean, we're the privileged few that actually are able to consider neutralizing or mitigating our emissions. And I wonder, what message are we giving to our students and to our constituents when we say, well, all we need to do is mitigate our own emissions, and then we're done? So there's a lot of issues, I think, around of pricing carbon based on market forces. Another big issue with offsetting is what's called additionality, and this is the idea that it can't be business as usual. The project has to have happened because of the offset funding. As an example, imagine another scenario where you pay me some money to plant some trees, okay, and I plant those trees. But then you find out that, you know what, I was going to plant those trees anyway. Well, you might be a little upset. And the truth is, it's very difficult to know when a project is in fact additional. And some estimate that as many as 70% of projects would have happened anyway, even without the offset funding, in which case they're not really offsetting anything. Also, because of all the costs of middlemen, offsetters typically are constrained to working with very large projects that because they need an economy of scale so that they can make a profit when they sell those credits on the market. And these projects tend to be at a great distance from the consumer, so they tend not to have much significance or meaning to the people buying them. So, for all these reasons, I thought, well, I don't want to offset to acknowledge Living Root's emissions from our flights. And I struggled with this for a number of years with what to do. And then finally, it dawned on me, well, what if we created a whole new system? We could call it onsetting. And it would look a lot like offsetting in that we would still measure our emissions, we would still reduce our emissions, and we'd still price those emissions, although in a different way, which I'll get to in a minute. But then, if we just drop this need to be neutral, which has all of these controversies around it, suddenly we can have a lot of advantages. For example, without having to pay the middlemen, we can get a lot more money to the projects themselves. And rather than guilty indulgences, we can have a pay-it-forward story, a positive story of saying, hey, look, let's be grateful for all that fossil fuels have enabled us to do as a civilization. And let's recognize that there is an externalized cost in burning those fuels. Now, let's internalize those costs and pay it forward and support projects that we know are doing good work in the world. And then, rather than price carbon based on market forces, we believe we should price carbon based on the best scientific estimate of what is it actually costing society through emitting carbon dioxide. The best estimate we found is called the social cost of carbon. It came out of the Obama administration in 2010. Obama set up 12 agencies, the EPA, the DOE, 10 others, and working with the best scientific data around, they really came up with their estimate of accounting for the actual costs of carbon. This is through adaptation to sea level rise, increased disease rates, catastrophic weather events, declining agriculture. All these things have costs. Now, of course, there are things that are difficult or impossible to cost. I mean, how do you put a price tag on a human life or an extinction of a species? But given these constraints, they came up with their best estimate, and it's currently $37 a metric ton. And this will go up each year because they're going to model this better, and the longer we delay, the more likely it is that the damages will be worse. And then, rather than worry whether our money is actually getting to the projects, onsetting says, let's get the money to projects that we already know, that we already trust are doing good work in the world. Small projects, local projects that we might not otherwise be able to support. And it was really this last idea that catalyzed my thinking with respect to Living Roots. And so this is what we did. We basically put this money toward projects in the local communities that we were visiting. So we supported solar cookers in Senegal and electric rickshaws in India, which, by the way, didn't work so well, but they're getting better. And recycling center in Mexico. This is called a dormitory in Israel, if you get the joke. Students actually live in these. And tree planting wherever we went. And it worked really well. The students loved it. It was a way for them to give back to their host communities. The communities obviously loved the support. It was a wonderful way for Living Roots to develop our relationships with these host communities. And it wasn't always easy. Collecting all the emissions data and selecting the project and distributing and tracking all those funds. To be honest, it was often a pain in the butt. For about a decade, I kept wishing someone would just set this up as an organization, as a business, to help me, to help others, that no, we need to step up and do something about our emissions, but the current option of offsetting just doesn't feel good, but there's really no other option. And so after a long time of waiting, I got tired and I finally decided to leave Living Roots to start Earth Deeds. And so we're really helping organizations understand and manage their carbon emissions and then support sustainability projects that have meaning to them. And just to be clear, because people often confuse this, I absolutely think we need to reduce our carbon emissions as quickly and as fully as possible. You get no argument from me on that. What we're saying is we need to do that, and we need to do so much more. Right? I mean, we need to create local and resilient food systems. We need to preserve biodiversity and wildness. We need to fight for climate justice and those who are unfairly burdened by the consequences of global warming. And we need to deconstruct and replace the economic and political systems and even the mindsets and worldviews that got us into this situation in the first place. You can't do any of that through offsetting. So this is our current site. We're really proud of it. And just to show you a little bit of what we've been doing, our first pilot was last year. I was teaching sustainable living at UMass Amherst, and we had about 80 students in the class. And so we measured the carbon footprints of just those students sitting in those seats, learning about sustainable living, came to almost 40 metric tons. We set a target of, I think, $836. And then we actually raised almost $900. And the students decided to give that money to the campus Eco-Rep program, which I thought was great. And we'll never know how much carbon dioxide that $876 kept out of the atmosphere. But the point is that's what had the most meaning to those students. They wanted to pay it forward and sort of pass the torch along, as it were, to other students that were similarly educating people around the state of the planet. Okay. Another example is we've been working with Pacific Lutheran University to onset the emissions of all their study abroad programs, and they set up a student committee to decide which projects that they would support. And the first year they decided that the money would go to support ecological retrofits of the campus building that's housing their global education programs, and that in future years the money would go to support projects in the host communities where the students are studying. So we're excited about that. And that project actually was a finalist in Second Nature's Climate Leadership Awards, and as such they had to create a wonderful felt animation for it. It was a lot of fun. And also, just one more example, we're working with CIS Abroad, a study abroad organization in Northampton, Massachusetts, and we help them measure the emissions of 10 of their programs and get money out to 10 projects in their host communities. This year, we're going to expand that to 14, and next year we hope to onset all 21 of their sites. So that's very exciting. And so thinking about AASHE, now we're aware that AASHE is already working with Sterling Planet to offset the emissions of the event itself, and I believe some of the staff travel associated with that. That's fine. We're not actually saying to do anything different from that. What we're saying is let's change this optional item where people who are coming to the conference can optionally offset their emissions. And so instead of offset, we would encourage to think about onsetting through a project that would be supportive to the constituents. And so clicking that would take them to a custom calculator that could look something like this, where people could measure their flights and ground travel associated with coming to the conference. For example, I'll probably fly from Boston to Minneapolis and drive back and forth to Boston in my Prius, and so that will actually emit almost exactly approximately 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. And then they can check out to see the social costs of those emissions, which would be $37. Next year actually would be $39. And then they can choose to voluntarily contribute whatever amount they like. And then we can issue reports to show, we can see the total emissions, and it would also help understand the emissions of putting on an event like AASHE. Now, thinking about what kinds of projects this could support, really, it's up to you. But just a couple ideas. One is that it could capitalize the AASHE Sustainability Awards that you're already giving. Could be the existing awards, or you could create a new climate change award or climate leader award that actually was supporting a project that was doing something more specifically around global warming or climate change. Another possibility is that it could support current or possible efforts within AASHE to make its events more sustainable. This could be purchasing more local or organic food, renewable energy, things like that you might not already be doing. Another possibility would be to support a local environmental organization. There's lots in Minneapolis, as you probably know. One possibility just would be Environment Minnesota. And this would be a way for the participants to really give back to the local community that's hosting the event. So just to reflect on some of the benefits of this is that, one, we feel that it really allows AASHE to walk its talk and to really be the change that it's trying to be in the world on all levels. It really would allow the constituents to support meaningful projects that they are connected to in some way. And it's a wonderful way to build awareness of participants of the conference and to also to understand what kinds of emissions an event like this puts out. And it's a great way to really engage the participants in something rather than just sort of check a box and say, just add this. It really helps them think it through and like, yeah, actually I have a certain amount of emissions involved with this conference. What is that? What is it together? I mean, we're academics, so these are questions that we should be thinking about. And as I've mentioned earlier, by doing this, we can avoid all of the inefficiencies and controversies in the carbon market. We can also demonstrate a model for how schools might account for their Scope 3 emissions, which is a bugaboo for many schools. And it's a great story. So we feel that it could generate a lot of positive PR. And we also have a carbon conscious eco label that AASHE and others can use. And we also have tools for people to be able to put this out through social media that would help promote AASHE and the project as well. So thinking about a timeline of how this might all work, it would be nice to talk further and maybe just confirm some details on the process by the end of the year. We could then select projects as you can. We can certainly help with this if you like. And then we can create custom calculators and materials. We already have some basic ones, but we could do more based on your needs. And then it's really a matter of just putting the link into your registration and other materials. And then beginning next summer, as people start to register, they can voluntarily donate through the site. And then we can, when the event happens, we can provide reports to each onsetter and also to AASHE, so showing people their individual emissions, but also AASHE the full from the conference, and then we would distribute the funds to the projects and promote through social media that I mentioned earlier. So I think it could be a lot of fun, and I appreciate you considering this proposal. I'm very open to responding to any questions or thoughts you might have. And I very much look forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.